are individuals actually being empowered by technology, and to what end, right? So how are they being empowered and what are they doing with that power? The first narrative about technology that you hear a lot of is what I call liberation technology, right? That there's an emancipatory power of technology for marginalized groups to fight back against oppressive powers. So there's a group called Telecomics. They're sort of a network of hackers and activists, mostly Western, spread out around the world. When telecommunications were shut down in Egypt, they sort of mobilized and they saw themselves and they called themselves the IT support movement for the Arab Spring. But they did all sorts of interesting things. Like they partnered with a French telecom that was sort of seen as being generally hacker friendly to put a bunch of dial-up modems around Cairo where people could communicate outside of the country. They built a network of radio enthusiasts, of Egyptian radio enthusiasts, and had them set up these shortwave radio systems to communicate amongst each other so groups could coordinate using this. The second is what I would call a digital arms race that's emerging. And this isn't hugely surprising. We know that there's a huge market for these sorts of technologies. They're sold in big sort of telecommunications fairs or surveillance fairs, where governments literally come together and buy different surveillance technologies. In this digital arms race, I think traditional balances of power and the way we think of balances of power are obsolete. We just don't have the same trade-offs that we have in the physical world. There's a pretense, I think, that these exist only in conflict zones, and increasingly see that's not the case, where these technologies are creeping more and more into domestic policing, in airports, or along international borders. Acts of war are increasingly becoming both spatially and conceptually boundless. So spatially, because there's less and less of a distinction between international and domestic, both through legal regimes and through the technologies being used and through the processes, the algorithms that are actually driving this decision making. And conceptually, because we're just getting less and less of a distinction between war and peace, and we know that through the whole legal regime of the war on terror. So our state's leveraging the very same capabilities that exist in these digital networks to kind of fight back, right? To reinstate control. Spaces of dissent and spaces of activism and spaces of rebellion are arguably disappearing, whether it's encryption or access to a common network or whatever it might be. These technologies empower perceived good and bad. And this is a problem when your mandate as a government, or one's mandate as a government, is to protect oneself from the nefarious actors. That any society that commits itself to eliminating what makes anonymous possible and powerful risks losing the openness and uncertainty that have made the internet home to so much innovation, expression, and creativity. Seeking to target perceived threatening disruptive actors or digital actors, the state also risks shutting down all the positive benefits that the internet and digital networks allow. And this, to me, is the central tension for governments in this space.